Thank you for joining us today. My name is Sharon Fletcher, and I work in the Office for Victims of Crime, and I'll be your host today for our Vision 21 talk, Engaging with Experts, on trending topics. Before we get started, I want to make sure everyone can hear us. If anyone is having technical issues, please email us at ovcwebcast@ovcttac.org. OVC, in collaboration with OVC's Training and Technical Assistance Center, or OVC-TTAC, hosts the new online series, Vision 21 Talks, Engaging with Experts on Trending Topics, which includes our 4 inspiring talks. Inspired by OVC's Vision 21 recommendations to support strategic change in the victim assistance field, these virtual sessions provide innovative and relevant information about transformational victim service topics. So our topic today is supporting male survivors of violence. I'm excited to be here, and I hope you are too, because we have what I believe will be a very meaningful discussion planned. So I want to start by giving you a little bit of history about how this topic came to be selected. So I'm going to guess that everyone here has heard about Vision 21, mostly because my colleagues are in the audience. But in 2014, OVC developed Vision 21, which is essentially a strategy to change the way we respond to victims in our country through a comprehensive and systemic approach to ensure that every crime victim receives the best responses and services. So, in other words, Vision 21 is really OVC's plan to move the victim service fields forward in the future, recognizing multiple areas of need in the field, as well as how the field continues to change. It drives what we do at OVC every single day. The final report for Vision 21 contained a number of key findings, one of which was the need to expand victim services to reach underserved and unserved victim populations, specifically young men of color, African American, and Latino young men. Our goal at OVC is to reach every victim. So reaching underserved populations and providing them with services that work best for them is one of our primary focuses. The reason that OVC is uplifting this specific underserved population is that African American and Latino young men are more likely to become victims of violent crimes, specifically homicide. There are numerous statistics that have shown this to be true. However, despite these troublesome statistics, the victim service field and other allied professionals that serve crime victims have been slow and often even reluctant to recognize and serve these victims. We've also learned from years of research and practice about the harmful effects of trauma and violence on our communities, especially those communities that experience higher levels of crime and violence. In the interest of time, and because most of this will be covered by our panelists, I won't go over all of the research, but I will summarize by mentioning that when people are exposed to violence, which includes both directly experiencing violence and witnessing violence, it causes trauma. And this trauma can manifest itself in different ways for each individual. Signs of trauma include difficulty managing emotions, difficulty learning, and other behaviors that others might find erratic, or even riskier behaviors such as substance abuse and criminal activity. So the need to address this trauma that is experienced by crime victims, especially those that are most likely to become victims, and that statistics show are victimized at higher rates than other segments of our population, make connecting victims to supportive services an extremely important step in a survivor's healing process. We know that connecting young men of color that have been harmed by violence with services and support can prevent both retaliation and re-injury. Breaking this cycle of violence is important, not just for the individual victim, but for us all, because we all want and deserve to feel safe in the communities where we live and work. Some of the points I've mentioned align with recommendations from the Attorney General's Task Force on Children's Exposure to Violence, which some of you may know as Defending Childhood. OVC recognized this overlap in 2015 and began working with our partners at the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, which is the office in the department that leads the Defending Childhood initiative. And we also reached out to our partners at the National Institute of Justice to develop the Supporting Male Survivors of Violence initiative. This important initiative has three parts. First, it's working in 12 demonstration sites across the country to implement a variety of programs to reach and serve boys and men of color harmed by violence. Second, it's providing dedicated technical assistance support to the demonstration sites through the Healing Justice Alliance, or HJA. HJA is actually a partnership of organizations that includes the Youth Alive, the National Network of Hospital-Based Violence Intervention Programs, Cure Violence, and the Berkeley Media Studies Group. Each of these organizations have been in the trenches for years, working to improve services for these young men and change the narrative about who deserves to receive services. And lastly, we're evaluating the programs funded to help increase the evidence base to show what types of programs and interventions best serve boys and men of color harmed by violence. Research Triangle Institute, which some of you may know as RTI, is the organization leading the national level evaluation effort. With all of this in mind, we've just organized today's session to continue the conversation about reaching these survivors and their families and connecting them to much needed services and support. I'm very excited to get this panel going, so now I'll give the floor to Ann Marks, who is served as moderator for our session and is Executive Director of Youth Alive, which, as I just mentioned, is part of the Healing Justice Alliance. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. Thank you to the Office for Victims of Crime and for the Office of Justice Programs hosting us here today. It is incredibly gratifying to be at a moment where this is a topic of importance and interest for this group. Sharon described a lot of the Healing Justice Alliance and what it is we do, so I won't restate that, but I will state the value behind why the Healing Justice Alliance exists. It's because of programs like the ones you're about to hear from and individuals like the ones that you are about to hear from who understand that there is no justice unless there is healing. And so I would encourage you that every time you see the word justice, insert healing in its place and think how that might feel. If we're really serving victims, we should be here in the Office of Healing Programs. And when we look at young men, black men, brown men, we should remember they are disproportionately victims of violence in need of healing. And so I am gratified to be here on the panel today with these tremendous healers. First, you're going to hear from Sherman Spears, who was the founder of Caught in the Crossfire, the first hospital-based violence intervention program. Then you'll be hearing from Dr. John Rich, who is the co-director for the Center for Nonviolence and Social Justice at Drexel University in Philadelphia. And then you will hear from Dr. Ted Corbin, who is also a co-director of the Center for Nonviolence and Social Justice, as well as the medical director for the Healing Hurt People program. And after him will be Kenton Kirby, who is the Director of Trauma Support Services at Crown Heights Mediation Center in Brooklyn. So we're going to go hopping around the country from Oakland to Philadelphia to New York. And after that, we're going to take some questions both here in the room and from those of you who can email in your questions. And so we hope to have a very rich discussion about how and why violence is really a health issue and how programs like these can help create healing. So with no further ado, Sherman.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sherman Spears. I'm the founder of the hospital-based intervention program called the Crossfire. And thank you guys for giving me the opportunity to participate in this discussion today on how to support young men affected by violence. So I would like to start off to say that I myself found myself at the age of 19, a young victim of male violence. And because of that, I had a lot of healing and discovery to go on about myself. When I woke up in the hospital after being a multiple gunshot victim, I woke up thinking that my life had traumatically been turned upside down, and I had all kind of questions and fears about what life would be now, especially since it resulted in my permanent paralysis and being in a wheelchair. I had at the time I had no experience with people being paralyzed or living in a wheelchair, so all of this was new to me. And you would think that in that situation that there would be someone or some organization that could come in and tell me how life would be and what to expect and what kind of support systems that would be in place for me. But as I quickly discovered, there were none. That at that time of my injury, there were no such things as services for victims of violence. And so everything was a discovery basis for me. Um, and so to be here today to try and talk to you guys about how we can provide support for male victims of violence is a great honor for me. Um, Through my own injury, what I realize is that when you wake up and you're in the hospital and you're a male and you've been victimized, is that all of your preconceived notions about yourself change. We're raised as males to believe that we're strong, and if we show fear, that that's a sign of weakness, and to reach out for help, that's a sign of weakness. And so, more often than not, we turn in on ourselves and become closed off and recluse, and not really opening to the services of social services that are presented to us. And at that time, our only concern is, how do I go on? And who do I trust? Because once you're a victim of gun violence, you're very mistrustful of everybody and everything. And so, what I found out, the only thing that helped me heal was I was given the opportunity to become part of a change. I was unlike most victims of violence, I was given the opportunity to work within my injury and to use that injury to try and help other people. And because of that, I was able to heal. And because of that, I was able to develop the Cardinal Crossfire program. And through the Cardinal Crossfire program, um, it was really created to serve a need that I did not find for myself. So what we do in Crossfire is when someone is injured in our community, someone is immediately dispatched to the bedside to be there, to be that supportive person, and let the victim know that you're not alone, that if you need help, there's a helping hand, and we're here to help and support you. And when I was in the hospital, you would think that your friends and your family would come and they would be supportive of, um, of your healing process. But more often than not, because they have no idea of how to be supportive, the conclusion that they come to is the only way that I can support you is by going out and victimizing someone else. And that very thought process is why there's a recidivism, and one person hurts another person, and so on and so on. And unless we can come to the point where we can let males know that when you're victimized, that there is a certain level of mental trauma and mental health that you need to heal, this this scenario keeps playing itself out over and over again. And so I think that one of the things that was apparent to me is that when I did try to reach out for services, there was almost a preconceived notion that I must have played some part in my victimization. And more often than not, it's not true. And I believe that even if it is true, if you're a victim of violence, you need help to be healed, because if you're not healed, it's going to be more harmful to your community than anything else. I'm not sure if you guys understand, but there is a terminology in the medical field of treat and street, which means that victims of gunshot violence, all the doctors can do is stabilize you and then send you back out into the same environment that you were victimized in the first place, with no more understanding of how to avoid that or deal with your victimization than you had when you came in. And so, just a small story. One of the doctors that I work with would tell me how he's a trauma surgeon, how he would get a victim on the table, and when he takes off his clothes in order to operate on him, he would find the same bandages on him from when he was there recently. And so that in itself tells us that if young male victims of violence do not get services, the recidivism rate is not going to stop. And also, the recurrence of sending someone else in there is not going to stop. So by providing services to the victims, not only do we help heal them, we can help heal our community, because someone has to be there to tell these young people that enough is enough, and that we believe in you, and that we're going to be here to support you through your healing process. And those kind of programs are the only things that are really going to make a difference in our community. Sorry. And so I would like to encourage you guys that are in a funding position or in a program position to really think about what it is that we can do to help this unserved population. Because if we do nothing, then nothing will change. And until we take it seriously, and regardless of what the circumstances were that brought a young man into this position, we as a community, as a nation, have to be there to say that we support you and we believe in you, and that we know that given the opportunity, there can be change. So going forward, I think that we have to try and restructure our thinking and restructure the way that money is dispersed, because the only persons that are seen worthy of being or receiving help is domestic violence and alcohol violence, and even prisoners coming out of jail receive more support and more programs and more benefits than the young males that are out there trying to survive. And most of these males, given the opportunity, would make a change for the positive and be productive citizens in our society. But we have to give them that chance and that opportunity without having preconceived judgments on why they were victimized or how deserving they are of our help. Thank you.
Thank you, Sherman. That really, I'm moved by the commitment and the action that you spurred in the setting of having been traumatized and victimized. And I think that that speaks to something we talk about, that often young people come out of these experiences with a survivor mission, that they want to make a change in communities so that others aren't traumatized. And I want to build on what Sherman said by talking about the lens of trauma. How is it that if we take what we know about trauma, the science of trauma and adversity, and apply it to the lives of young people, we see a different set of solutions in front of us? And we often think about that in the way that Sherman was talking about it. We see a young person who's been injured. We may come with a particular preconceived notion. It was their own fault. They got themselves shot. They were doing something that they shouldn't have been doing. But when we take the lens of trauma and apply it to these young people, we often find that their actions are coming out of their past trauma, or the experience of trauma that landed them in the hospital. And I'll talk a little bit more about how we begin to bridge the disconnect between our preconceived notions and what these young people are experiencing. Perhaps the starting context for thinking about trauma is to think about stress. Stress is a common word, a word we're mostly familiar with, but to provide a specific definition, we think about stress as the set of changes in the body and the brain that are set into motion when there are overwhelming threats to physical or psychological well-being. Many of us on a day-to-day basis encounter what we talk about as stress, but not all stress is the same. We might think about stress as in some cases being positive. So when we're faced with a challenge, perhaps it's an exam or school studies that have to be overcome. We think about a sports competition, maybe a musical recital. Those are often experiences that are short-lived, and in the end, you come out of it stronger. Then many of us are familiar with what we might call tolerable stress. These are more intense: the loss of a job, illness in the family, perhaps the death of a family member. These are short-lived, but with adequate support, they're unlikely to cause long-term problems. More recently, we've come to understand a concept called toxic stress. Toxic stress is the kind of sustained adversity that was studied in the Adverse Childhood Experiences study, or that victims of repeated sexual abuse or violence or child abuse experience. And these are sustained, and children particularly are unable to manage this stress by themselves, and in the long run it can cause disruption to the physical body and to the mind. So we often are faced with different types of stress, and we in health and in justice are thinking about how to study these and understand them so we can intervene most effectively. But post-traumatic stress disorder is a different type of stress, and it's well defined in the literature. It was initially noted in people returning from war in Vietnam, but there are 4 main components of post-traumatic stress. The first is hyperarousal or hyperreactivity. That's a jumpiness, a sense of never feeling safe, inability to sleep. It's a kind of revved up state where the body's normal fight or flight response is put into overdrive, and it occurs in people who have experienced extreme trauma. There's re-experiencing or intrusive symptoms. This includes nightmares, flashbacks, and what we often call body memories. That is a feeling in your body, potentially pain, or another sensation that's associated with what you experience. And these are often brought on by triggers, being somewhere near what happened to you or seeing someone else violently injured. The one we don't talk about as much is emotional numbing. This is the loss of the ability to feel, the loss of the ability to feel fear or love, and it can be very disruptive to relationships, very disruptive to families. And finally, what's termed negative alteration in cognition and mood. This is inability or difficulty concentrating or depression. Now, young people who have been victims, young men of color, often display all of these in the aftermath of injury or because of witnessing violence. Yet, in hospital or healthcare settings or in social settings, it's often misinterpreted. That is, a young person who doesn't have much expression, who may not make eye contact, who may be jumpy, is often interpreted as, well, he must have had something to do with it. He must be guilty. And so what you have is a person who's suffering in a healthcare environment, and instead of a healing intervention, we treat them and we street them. We know from research that young people experience high rates. And so in Healing Herd People that you'll hear about in a moment, when we looked at young people who had come through as victims of violence, 75% of these young people met full criteria for post-traumatic stress. But even those who didn't meet full criteria, many of them suffered from re-experiencing or hyperarousal or avoidance. And so we're seeing really epidemic levels of trauma and stress in young people. We are also seeing very high levels of adverse childhood experiences, that is, experiences of childhood neglect, abuse, or family disruption with substance abuse, mental illness, violence in the family, or incarceration of a family member. In the original study that defined adverse childhood experiences, you'll see here in the blue, in the original study, 13% of the people, mostly a insured population in Southern California, 13% had experienced 4 or more adversities in their lives. In the clients that we see, young people who have been victims of violence, 50% have experienced 4 or more. And in the original study, 64% had experienced at least one. Among the people that we see, young victims of violence, 100%. Well, you might then ask, what is the relationship between post-traumatic stress and violence? Well, let me detail for you something that we've learned in in-depth interviews and studying young people and talking to them, gathering their stories. Well, let's say a young person comes in with an injury, and as a result, they develop post-traumatic stress. They're jumpy, they're not able to sleep, they feel unsafe all the time, having nightmares and flashbacks. No one's explained to them in the hospital if this is going to happen to them. They have no context. They think they're going crazy. Young people often turn to something in their environment to treat their distress, like marijuana or alcohol. Well, what happens to someone who turns to marijuana or alcohol? Well, if you're trying to get a job and they urine test, you're not going to be able to get a job. If you're on probation, you will be remanded if you have drugs in your urine. And so what happens is a young person trying to self-treat may find themselves in deeper trouble or cut off from opportunity. It is no secret to us as well that young people don't trust the police often because they have been targeted, young people of color in particular. And if you don't trust the police and you don't feel safe, many young people turn to weapons as a way to protect themselves. Ill-advised, but we understand in the context of trauma that that may be all they see as an opportunity. And we know that the risk of incarceration or death is elevated when you have PTSD and you have a weapon. We know that for young people who have been victims of violence, if you follow them for 5 years, studies have done this, 45% of them have been shot or stabbed again, to Sherman's point, and 20% of those young people are dead. So it's a very high risk experience to be a victim of violence. But we also know that it's not only the healthcare system and the hospital that encounters young people who have been victims. The truth is, they are encountered by the police, often at the time that they've been injured. They may be in school. They may be involved in healthcare. Any number of these systems are touching them. And at any point, a system that touches you can either help you heal or it can re-traumatize you. And so we have an opportunity working together, as many of the programs under the Serving Male Survivors of Violence are doing, to not only focus on the healthcare environment, which is a potent and powerful moment, but also to focus on these other systems in working together. The term we use collectively here and amongst our partners is trauma-informed practice. Trauma-informed practice is an approach that recognizes the psychological, not just the physical wounds, but also the deep wounds of trauma that these young people are left with. And also recognizes that early childhood adversity and stress can change your body and even put you at risk for chronic disease. That's well known. So when we're talking about treating trauma, we are talking about preventing violence, but we're also talking about easing the burden and disparity of chronic disease that affects disproportionately people of color and especially men of color. A framework for thinking about the needs of victims of trauma, and Sharon, you made reference to this earlier, comes from the sanctuary model. This nonlinear conceptual framework supports the idea that people who have been traumatized need to reestablish safety, physical, psychological, social, and moral safety. They need support managing their emotions. They need help dealing with loss, the losses that come not only from losing friends or losing function in your body, but also the loss that comes when you have to choose one path over another. And then finally, victims of trauma need to be able to see a future, because one of the most potent effects of trauma is to cut off your ability to see past into the future, a brighter future. This is the framework that undergirds Healing Hurt People and undergirds many of the programs in the initiative that are looking at how to help young people heal. And with this, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Corvin, to talk about Healing Hurt People.
Good morning. Thank you, John. Thank you, Sherman. Thank you, Ann. And Kenton will follow me up. John set the tone for how we developed Healing Hurt People in Philadelphia based on the model that Sherman developed in California, Caught in the Crossfire. I'm just going to walk you through what this actually entails in identifying and working with young victims of interpersonal injury. I'm an emergency medicine physician, and it's unfortunate that we see so many young people come through as victims of interpersonal injury. I'm based in Philadelphia, a population of about 1.4 million people. We have 5 level 1 trauma centers that tend to these victims of interpersonal injury. At our hospital, Hahnemann University Hospital, which is the affiliate of Drexel University, this is the schematic in which we work in terms of how we see the young person that comes through the emergency department. You'll see if you start up in your left-hand corner, you see someone that's violently injured. The hospital does a great job of stabilizing the person. But to what Sherman said earlier, in these days of medical practice, it is upon us to get the patients out as quickly as possible. And for every one person that's shot, stabbed, or assaulted, they're admitted, and then 9 people are treated and discharged. And so again, there's an opportunity to have a healing presence and purpose for that young person when they're identified as a victim of interpersonal injury. At Hahnemann, we have that opportunity in that we have a skilled social worker as well as a community health worker peer, and I'll talk about them in a minute, that really identifies these young people and works with them to heal from the trauma that they've experienced. There's a lot of pre-work in gaining trust with the young people because, again, as Dr. Rich mentioned, there's a lot of mistrust both in the healthcare system as well as the justice system, and really trying to deconstruct that notion that our young people have, that we are in fact there to help them heal from the trauma that they've experienced. You'll see at the bottom, I'm not going to go through detail, but you can look at this schematic and see where our social workers and our community health worker peers work with the individuals that have been victims of interpersonal injury. There's an assessment that happens. There's case management and navigation of the systems. There's mentoring. We also have a self group, which is essentially a peer group that works with the individuals who've experienced interpersonal injury. And then for our younger population, we have a more trauma-specific treatment, which is child family traumatic stress intervention, which is working with the young person as well as a caregiver or a parent and the licensed social worker. What we actually provide is in these different quadrants we work with to help the person heal from their physical wounds in a myriad of ways, their social health by helping them navigate the different systems within the city that they sometimes don't access because they don't know that they're available to the individual. We also work with them in terms of their behavioral health as well. All these things are extremely important in us helping them heal. And then finally, we work with them around their family health as well, because we know that helping this one person heal is not as good as helping the family heal as well. In Philadelphia, we were given the opportunity to replicate Healing Hurt People at the different level 1 trauma centers in Philadelphia. We started at our hospital, Hahnemann, which I mentioned. We also mentioned that we have a children's site, our St. Christopher's Hospital for Children, which is based in the north part of our city. And unfortunately, we see a lot of victims of interpersonal injury there. We've since been able to replicate the program at Einstein Medical Center, Temple University Hospital, as well as Penn Presbyterian Medical Center. And so in doing that, we also saw the opportunity to have a natural experiment. So we recognize as we develop these programs, we want to make sure that we're doing a good job at helping the young people that we're serving, as well as making sure that the fidelity is in place, as well as evaluating how the program actually works. And so we took the opportunity of this natural experiment. In doing so, we took advantage of, as we ramped up the program at these different sites, we also took an opportunity to collect information from a control group. And then as we ramped up, we collected information from the control group, and then once we started the program, we collected information from the intervention group. You can see this is the schematic of the data collection that we're doing in evaluating the program. At the bottom, you'll see we're looking at how, we're looking at re-injury in terms of hospitals, hospital revisits, and then also we're looking at arrest rates. But most importantly that we're interested in are the more proximal things that you'll see on the sides in terms of depression, PTSD, drug and alcohol use, sleep quality. This is another schematic as to how we rolled out this natural experiment in collecting the information from the different institutions. And it also allowed us to be as rigorous as a randomized control design, worked with the timing of the replication, and we ameliorated the ethical consideration of withholding the program for which we knew had some impact on the lives of the individuals. Just to give you a sense of some of the preliminary data that we have found, we see, looking at baseline, we see that 78% of our participants report poor sleep quality, 55% of the participants met full criteria for provisional PTSD, 45% met or exceeded the cutoff of major depression. In terms of some preliminary trends, we also see at baseline sleep quality is very poor, but then in working with the program, they get better. As well as provisional PTSD, in our intervention group, we see that there is some improvement in those that are involved in the program. Finally, in looking at how we can make the program better in working with young people, with the support of OVC, we were able to work with and develop community health workers. And in doing that, we've recognized for a long time that community health workers are valuable assets to any type of healthcare program. But specifically in this setting, young people that have lived experiences, that have graduated and done their own healing work, we've incorporated them into our program to connect to the young people that are victims of interpersonal injury. We also recognize the opportunity through the Affordable Care Act, how we can get reimbursed for the services of those young people that are providing as community health worker peers. Lastly, on one of the slides you saw that we do have this, we bring together different agencies to talk about a patient that's involved in healing hurt people. And it's an opportunity to figure out how these different sectors can, in fact, improve provisional services to the victims of interpersonal injury, identify policy-level barriers, and create trauma-informed systems. Lastly, I'm going to share with you one of our community health worker peers' story. This is a young man who was the victim of multiple gunshot wounds, enrolled in a program, and did his own work and did his healing with the help of Healing Hurt People. And now he's one of our community health worker peers, staffing the emergency departments on Saturday nights and Friday nights, the peak times that we see interpersonal injury. And I'm just going to let you hear his story.
Safety is the condition of being safe. freedom from danger, risk, or injury. My definition of safety was being around my friends holding guns, but little did I know that my definition of safety was about to change. November 23rd, 2011, I was shot while someone was trying to mug me. Being out there every day selling drugs, I knew would eventually get me shot. I just didn't think it would happen how it did. I was walking out of an apartment complex when I saw a shady figure at the entrance to the complex. At that exact moment, I knew my fate. I tried to play it cool by walking past him, but he grabbed my arm, put a gun on my side, and forced me to the back of the apartment complex. Thinking of how to get away, I grappled with the gunman, threw him to the ground, and the gun went off. I was shot 3 times that night. Safety was now a top priority. Having nightmares every night made me feel like I needed to have a gun on me. In my dreams, I would always get shot. The only way I knew how to stay safe was to have a gun and stay around people with guns. Time went on and I was back to the same bad habits, back to the block. Safety was on the brain, so I stopped hustling in the apartment complex. I went to the next safest place, the corner. But being on the corner made me more on edge and put me at greater risk for something to happen to me again. Back then, safety was just having a chance to escape danger. August 30th, 2012, I was shot again on the corner I was hustling on. Not again, I said to myself as I was laying on the ground. I couldn't feel my right leg. The thoughts going through my head were I'd rather die than to be in a wheelchair for the rest of my life. Once in a while, I go back to the spot where I was laying, and I see myself on the ground in pain. I talk to myself that's lying on the ground, shot and bleeding. Trying to comfort myself, I tell myself, you're going to be okay, it's going to be all right. A month in the hospital gave me a lot to think about how I was going to stay safe. I thought the only place I could be safe was the hospital. Today I stay safe by being around people who support me in my future. I stay away from the neighborhood where I was injured. I go to school. I participate in Heal and Hurt People program as a client and an intern. I'm making safety decisions that allow me to have a better future. This is what safety means to me now.
Jermaine, and the Office of Victims of Crime has allowed us to develop this community health worker peer project. And lastly, I just want to add that it's really about changing our narrative, changing the conversation, recognizing the humanity of the young people that we're working with, and that all people are deserving of all the services that we have to offer. And then finally, I also just want to say that it's so important that we recognize that many of the young people that we encounter, that we're working with, it's not just about the post-traumatic stress, it's about the sustained traumatic stress that they're enduring and how we can help them heal or give them tools to manage those issues. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kenton.
Hello, everybody. All right. Before I kind of jump in, I just want to say, just listening to these amazing programs out there inspires me to continue in this work. So I am from the Crown Heights Community Mediation Center. I run a program called Make It Happen, and it's a community-based program to work with young men of color between the ages of 16 and 24 who've been directly or indirectly impacted by violence. As I say directly or indirectly because there's young men who've been shot, been assaulted, but also people who've witnessed it, people who are the aggressors in those situations. There's a mantra I always hear, hurt people, right? So in our program, we recognize the fact that we are engaging with a population that has mistrust of traditional mental health services. And that mistrust is completely justified based on systemic racism, historical trauma, community trauma, and their own individual history of trauma. So our program, the foundation is working with these young men around their definition of masculinity, how they've been socialized, and how that socialization has been a way for them to stay safe, but also the whole trauma history that that they have to deal with. So how do we do this? We do individual therapy, we do group work, we do case management. We work with these young men. We don't expect them to sit in our office, in our space, and talk to me about their trauma history or their level of victimization when they don't know where they're going to get their next meal. They don't know where they're sleeping that night. They may be leaving my office and have to know that they got to go back into a territory where they may actually be a target for any sort of violence. So truly understanding what these young men's experiences are out there in the world, and providing that service for them. So I'm a social worker by trade, so meeting the client where they're at is not just something that we figuratively say, we literally meet them where they're at. For example, one of the questions that we'll ask in our intake is, all right, where this neighborhood, this is where our programming is, are you okay to come over here? Yes or no, okay? And then we work with them from there. In our program, we take a similar approach to what's an ACT team, which is an acronym for Assertive Community Treatment, right? So this is a population that may have a history of not following through with traditional mental health services, so you go out to them, you work with them. With that approach, we're able to build trust with these young men. We also identify the fact that recovering from any sort of pain is a process. You may take 5 steps forward in your healing, and then you may take 2 steps back. You may have been an aggressor in that relapse, and it's very important for our program to stick with you, and that's where the advocacy part comes in. So whenever our young men are, because a lot of our young men are connected to various systems of oppression, the criminal justice system, child welfare system, anything, and it's our charge is to stay with them through that. We'll go to court with our young men. There's some sort of transitional object whenever they're faced with these larger systems, something from the program that is representing them and portraying them in a light where we're recognizing their humanity. We don't use words like non-compliant, uncooperative. If you don't show up to our program, the first thing we ask is, what happened? Are you okay? Because a lot of times, many people don't ask those questions to these young men. The other part of the program is we really want to help these young men build on their emotional intelligence. Because if you think about, I'll give an example. So let's say a little boy is learning how to walk, right? And he falls flat on his face. He's about to cry. What do you think everyone says around him? Stop crying, boy. Get up, boy. Cry, walk that off. So if you think about primary attachment and like your 0 to 5 when it comes to child development, that's your first lesson in how to navigate the world as a man. You've already had your emotions you're messaging that your emotions are supposed to be under control. You gotta only show happiness or anger. So when that kid is school age and he's in school and he maybe is embarrassed by something, so he flips a table over or he throws a chair, that kid's then labeled oppositional defiant. He's labeled a problem. And those labels follow you all the way through until, unfortunately, many of our young men get caught up in the criminal justice system. And those things come back and bite them in the butt when they're done. So in our program, our groups are around kind of breaking down what that definition of masculinity and the trauma history, and hopefully in the hopes of improving their emotional intelligence. A lot of times when I check in with the young men in our program, I go, how are you today? And I never let them say, I'm good. I want more than that. What do you mean you're good? Tell me more. And I feel by doing that over and over again, it gets them to start thinking a little bit more about what their real emotions are. Because when you live in communities where you're impacted by violence, you're seeing it, you're targeted by it, you are participating in it, all around trying to stay safe, where is the space for you to actually check in with yourself? Who are you? A lot of young men I work with always say that they have to be on point. So when I think of being on point, that's being hyper-vigilant, hyper-aroused to your environment, because that's all about being safe. And those are all traumatic reactions. So really breaking down what that emotional intelligence is for these young men. So we do these 10-week groups around masculinity and trauma. And fortunately, because we're lucky to be with these wonderful partners, we adopted a self group. So we run self-programming with our young men, which is great because they can now facilitate the group themselves, and it's getting them to start thinking about the future, because they know at the end of the day, their safety is about kind of trying to get from moment to moment. And we did something this summer which I was very proud of. Took some of our participants who've been in the Make It Happen program, and we trained them to be peer facilitators. So we spent this summer, they were learning about how to run groups, how to, they call themselves the junior social workers. And they learned how to run groups. I took them around the city to see the different resources out there, because it's very important when they're out in the community and they come across somebody that in their lives that may need help or some sort of healing that is not connected to our program or a hospital-based program. These young men have the tools that they can extend it to them. And another part of our program that we really pride ourselves on is whenever we make referrals out of our program, we make sure that we've seen the programs. We make sure we vet them, because we're all about building trust with the young men. And if we send them out someplace and it doesn't turn, they're not treated, they're not honored, they're not valued, they're not validated in their experiences, then I lose my own buy-in with these young men, and I didn't do my job. So every referral that we send our young men to is measured. We connect with the people, and we do a soft handover to them. And that is how we have pretty good buy-in. In the past 18 months, we've had about 107 young men through the program, and we've only had 2 new arrests in our program. So it's just administrative data, but it speaks to the need for the program, the desire for the program. The groups are 10 weeks, and a lot of young men still stay connected to the program. A lot of times these young men, they look at therapy as, oh no, that's a white person's problem. But when they're sitting with me and we're talking about all of the struggles and the challenges and trying to navigate the world that's actually unsafe for them to begin with based on all the systems, I sit there and go, we just spent 45 minutes talking. This was a therapy session, right? And they're like, oh, wow, yeah, but you're different, Ken, you're cool. Or like, anyone else on our staff is cool, but I'm like, wouldn't it be great if you had, most people when they go to therapy, they can pick and choose what therapist they want. It's really about the fit. It's really about that. We have that privilege to say that you're not a right fit for me. Our young men should have the same exact right. So I want to show you guys a story with one of my participants. His name is John. I have permission to share his story. He came into the program about 2 years ago, and I will let him share his story. There you go.
The shell that I usually go into is basically like a safe house. Everything is all right in that shell, but it's also lonely in there. I used to get bullied a lot, and he used to call me Blackie because of my complexion. I was the quietest one inside of school, and yet I'm the one getting picked on.
I met John about 1.5 years ago. Just kind of getting to know John, realizing that, he's had a history of being targeted because of his skin color, the fact that his family live in poverty, maybe he doesn't have the most expensive sneakers or the clothes. He mentioned really struggling with people walking behind him. So imagine living in New York City with that being something that triggers you.
I think that's part of the anxiety that came up in me, like that really want to explode and just take everybody in there that ever made fun of me.
In the city of New York, statistics around kind of young men of color and incarceration is kind of glaring.
Of the city jail population, 58% of that population are young men of color between the ages of 19 and 24.
So that right there shows that there are some serious systemic issues that are impacting the lives of these young men. The Make It Happen program is a program directed at young men of color between the ages of 16 and 24 who've been directly impacted by community violence. And we discussed the intersections between what healthy masculinity looks like for these young men and the history of trauma that they've dealt with. We run programming in some non-secure detention centers. We have researchers that work with us. We formed relationships with the Kings County District Attorney's Office.
Every time I go to make it happen, I always have to speak up, talk to people. It starts to open up more and make it happen. I started doing it in school. It was out of my comfort zone at first, but after a while, I just started, start getting used to it. It's like, oh, this is getting cool.
I want our young men to challenge their definition of masculinity because a lot of times that definition is intertwined with their own trauma history.
I was like, like a worthless person. So Make It Happen was a big impact on me, trying to open up more and try to make friends a whole lot better.
His history of being targeted and bullied put him in this shell. Now he has a voice. He's starting to develop into an adult. And that's all I wanted for him. That's all he wanted for himself.
Make It Happen was the best thing for me, especially in my social life.
Accountability is important for things that you do, but you can still hold someone accountable, but also validate their experience. I mean, that's a restorative approach to helping people. One thing I've noticed that helped me grow through all of the pain and obstacles in my life was that there were people out there that took an interest in me. When you feel safe and you feel validated, by validating being supported, you can do anything. You can really move forward. That took an interest in me. When you feel safe and you feel validated, by validating being supported, you can do anything. You can really move forward.
So before I close, I just want to share one thing about that video. He mentions the shell. So that was how he stayed safe. And that shell was actually something that he actually did. If you notice, he's actually taller than me. When I first met him, I thought he was shorter than me because he literally slouched down and he'd wear a hood over his head. He literally created a shell for himself to survive the world that he was in. So it took a while before I realized, like, wait, one day, you're actually taller than me. And you know what, that young man is finally having the opportunity to get some control in his life. He's learned a lot, and it's a work in progress. But we are proud of him, and we're proud of all of the young men that come through our program. Thank you.
Yeah, Sherman, John, Ted, Kenton, those are great, really inspiring presentations, and definitely appreciated that. There is information that you see on the screen now for people to start asking questions. I should not say start because you guys have already gotten started with some questions coming in, so thank you for sending those in. I also want to give the panelists an opportunity to ask each other any questions or share any responses that you would like to with each other, but I will answer one question first, if you don't mind me taking the privilege of answering it myself, which was a question about kind of defining what hospital-based violence intervention is. So there are really four kind of key components to what hospital-based violence intervention is, but how it looks really depends on the community where it's taking place. It is the notion that there is a golden moment to intervene with a victim immediately after an injury, a violent injury has occurred, and to do so as soon as possible after that. To explicitly address retaliation prevention as well as long-term healing. To have the person who is approaching the survivor to be someone who is comes from the community or shares experiences or connection with that person, and to provide services not just in the hospital, but post-discharge, right, in the community as well, right, to get on that path. So not just treat and street, but to treat and then treat in the street. And so that's the concept there. And I do want to add that Kenton's program is a part of a Cure Violence model, which is a related model. And so for people that are interested in that model as well, It is based on the notion that violence is contagious, and so to interrupt and address violence when it occurs and also before it occurs, to identify and resolve conflicts using sort of street-based conflict mediation from credible messengers in the community. So that's sort of a very quick summary of those models. Gentlemen, is there any questions you have for each other or comments you want to share before we get into some of these other questions? Oh, okay, great. So, Sherman, why is it effective when someone like you goes to visit someone in the hospital?
I think the reason why it's effective when I go into the hospital is because when our youth, they grow up apprehensive and mistrustful of the system of authority, and they find their comfort and sense of identity among their peers and in their community. And statistics show that when they are injured, they're most likely injured by someone that looks like them or someone they know. So once again, there's another level of mistrust. And so when they are injured and wake up in the hospital, they have probably a medical team of nurses and doctors that's looking after their physical health. They're probably approached by police and investigators that are looking into their legal health. And more often than not, we're the first person that comes in that's concerned about their mental health. After you're shot and laying there, you're thinking about your life and what it means and how can you change and how do you move forward. And systematically, there's really no one there to answer those questions. And so the first thing that we do when we come in, I let them know that, I know that you're confused. I know that you're scared. I'm not with the police. I'm not with the hospital. I'm here to work with you and come to an understanding of helping you deal with how you're feeling at this point and helping you move forward past your injury. Because when you are mistrustful of everything and everyone around you, and the doctors and the police are coming in, your first instinct is to close yourself off. Me, myself, when I was in the hospital and they would come and talk to me, my response was to pull a blankets over my head and not talk to anyone. And that got me labeled as being depressed. And it wasn't that I was depressed, it's that I was mistrustful of these people that were coming in and trying to be evasive into my world and what was going on, and I didn't identify with them. So, but I know for a fact that that's one of the few times that a young male is questioning, how do I change my life? How do I keep this from happening to me again? And when we come in and we tell them, hey, I understand that you're scared. I understand that you're fearful. And this doesn't have to be the end for you. You can use this opportunity to change your life around, and we're here to help connect you with the services that you need to make that happen. And young people can pretty quickly determine whether or not you're genuine and whether or not you're genuine about wanting to help them, or is this just a spiel that you're bringing to them as another person trying to trick them into telling you what's going on. And so I think it's effective because they know that when we come in there that we're genuinely concerned about their mental state. Because when their friends come in, your friends come in and they want to support you because they love you. But the problem is that they don't know how to express or demonstrate that love. So often that frustration becomes, the only way that I can show you I love you is to go and injure the person that hurt you. And I think most people that know that if I send you out to attack my perpetrator, there's always an injury that you may get killed and I'll lose my loved one. You may go to jail, I'll lose my loved one. Or worse yet, you killed the person that shot me, and now their loved ones are looking for us. So when we go in, our whole thing is, hey, let us help you move forward. Let us help you get the support that you need. And in turn, what I want from you is to help me talk to your friends and family about not seeking retribution for your injury. And, kind of like a deal gets struck, a deal, not like solidified, but an unspoken deal gets struck up that I'll help you move forward and you'll help me start to curb the cycle of violence in our community. And together we can heal both.
Yeah, thank you, Sherman. I think Kenton referenced the phrase, and of course it's the name of Ted's program, Healing Hurt People, right? The idea that hurt people, and I think one of the things that we forget is that healed people heal people. I think you're a great example of that. I have a question for you, Ted, that came in. I just want to encourage, if there's anybody here live as well, just give me a signal and we'll take your questions as well. This is a question that came from Reverend Wayne Sylvester Daly, and he wanted to know what direct support services are offered to the victim's family, the parents, siblings, and friends through your program.
Sure, thank you for that question. With regard to the family, we have one thing that's unique and interesting about many hospital-based violence intervention programs is that the work doesn't stop in the hospital. Is that these are skilled we call them community intervention specialists that go into the home to follow-up appointments to court. And there's a case management aspect to that, which in some instances is the carrot. And while they're doing those case management things, they also infuse behavioral health counseling, talking about issues of trauma, right down to, do you have heat in your house? Do you have food? Because something that also goes neglected is the food insecurity that accompanies the young person as well as their families. And so there's a myriad of services that are provided or at least acknowledged so that we can start to get to the bottom of figuring out or establishing a plan to help the individual heal as well as their family. Because we recognize that in some instances, the person is only as good as their family's gonna be. And so it goes hand in hand in some of those instances when we're providing the behavioral health counseling. We might identify that the mom or in some instances the father might need that assistance as well. School is also important in all of this. So we touch on these different systems that are connected to the individual as well as connected to the family.
Thank you. I didn't know if anybody else wanted to add anything on that topic. If not, I'll move on. John, this is a question from Cheryl Green in St. Louis. Have the men you have interviewed elicited signs of, and she puts this in quotes, fatalism ideology?
I'm going to interpret that as young people who don't believe that they will see the future and therefore don't have anything positive in the future to weigh their current behavior against. I think we can take a trauma perspective on that. I think that young people who have lived in communities where they have seen a lot of violence and they have lost friends to violence do develop a kind of coping mechanism that has them think a lot about, well, what would I do if this happened to me? So we interview young people, they say, well, when they are shot or stabbed, they have a script in their minds, how they're going to escape, what are they going to do to stay safe. But there's a trauma perspective on this, that trauma itself can cut off your ability to see the future. And the reason I think it's important to think about this in the context of trauma is that if we decide that these young people simply have a fatalism mentality, it doesn't tell you what to do about it. But if we understand it as a consequence of trauma, then we also understand that by helping them heal from the trauma, it reestablishes their ability to see the future. That is not only true for these young people, it's true for any of us who go through a traumatic experience. We need someone, we need a supportive community to help us reestablish our ability to see the future. And so I think we have an opportunity into the work that Kenton and Ted and Sherman have talked about. That's what's happening, is help young people heal, help them reestablish helpful community, and to be able to see a future that in many ways they aspire to anyway. Because despite sometimes these expressions of fatalism, if you really engage young people in, well, what would you really like to be doing? Often they're able to talk about that. They're able to talk about a future that's viable and safe, and often related to family and work.
Thank you. So I think while we're talking about sort of the future part of self, there's actually another question I have about self that I'd love to hear from you, John, as well as Kenton. Maybe you could start on this. There's a question from Erica Bitar, who's in Williamson County. She says that we've discussed the self-intervention, but do you have thoughts on interventions like Target, TFCBT, Seeking Safety, PCIT, other types of interventions that were discussed actually at a Trauma-Informed Care Summit in Austin, Texas last week?
All right, so I feel all of those evidence-based models are effective. I personally think that it's very important to be eclectic in our approach. Trauma looks different from one young man to the next. So being able to borrow a little bit from TFCBT, borrow a little bit from motivational interviewing, I feel as service providers it's very important for us to literally really sit in the space with our clients and know that this is not a cookie cutter story. We can't just throw an evidence-based model at this particular client because maybe that's not going to work. Also, there's, once again, I go back to the fact that mental health services is mired in, white supremacy and race. It's a racist system too, and I admit that I am a part of that as a clinician. So being able to say, take bits and pieces of strategies to try to help these young men heal is what really is my approach. But I do feel some of those things can't help but just bits and pieces, in my opinion.
So there's a question here. It'd be great if you could be in the microphone. Thanks.
Thanks. Question I have is, particularly in your program, Kenton, in your 10 weeks, how long does it take for you to start to see some breakthroughs in the young men? You mentioned the I'm good question. How long does it take you to get to a point where they can verbalize where they really are and then to see a change? And the same for you.
All right, well, that's a good question. Well, in our program, it really depends on the young men. So at some point, whether they're actually appear to be actively engaged in the programming, whether they're talking a lot, or they're not, they don't appear to be actively engaged. Maybe in the corner with their hood on all day, but they're still participating in it. They're still taking in some of the information. So I say at some point, maybe like by the end of the program, by the end of the 10 weeks, I'm seeing some change. And I mean, change is hard, right? Imagine just even changing my diet is a struggle. Imagine changing when in the context of healing from a traumatic event or events. So I would say after the 10 weeks, but also with the other interventions, individual counseling, but also the buy-in. They actually really have to buy into the program and really see any change.
Great, thank you.
Hi, I'm Tuet Duong with OVC as the Language Access Fellow, and I wanted to speak to your point about institutionalized racism. What are the policy interventions with regards to institutionalized bias, and that you all are folks in the same orbit working on to make sure that, especially federally funded entities that have to comply with Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, are making sure they serve everyone equally and provide that equal access for everyone?
Well, I think this might be, if you allow me a point of privilege, I think this might be a good time to remind all the people from states across the country who are listening to this right now that one of the most important changes to VOCA is that it's now accessible to people who have been involved in the justice system. And if your state isn't providing services, adequate services to people who have touched the system, who have been incarcerated, then your state is out of compliance. And I don't think we need to emphasize, and I certainly couldn't emphasize any better than these gentlemen have today, the importance of providing services to young men of color who we know, due to institutional racism, are disproportionately incarcerated and need services as much or more than anyone. But I would leave that to you guys to also add your thoughts on this topic.
Well, also just kind of the HR, hiring practices, hiring people, hiring a team that looks like America. And I'm also working on issues of immigration status and culture and language. So if you want to talk about some of those other barriers and as they apply to other immigrant and newcomer communities, that would be great too.
I'll start a little bit. I think it's a really important question. It highlights the fact that we embrace a notion that culture is important, that racism is a key determinant of how these young people feel about themselves and how the systems serve them. And also that this notion of intersectionality, that these young people are more than one thing. So there's often this view that young men of color are, here's what they need. They need violence prevention. But what we know is that these young people are not, they're just one thing. Some young people aren't at high risk for re-injury or retaliation, but they're at high risk for having school disruption that will send them off of an academic path that was very promising in the beginning. I think much of our work begins within the individual institution to change the views of providers who are providing care and often provide at least unkind care to young people by assuming that they know who they are. And so that often entails providing trauma-informed education to residents, medical students, physicians, nurses in the institution as we orient them to the work of the program. And just one very powerful intervention is to bring a young person who has been a patient and been treated back later to meet the providers who provided the care, because often there's no connection to what that individual's life was. They're seen only when they were horizontal and in pain, and often, as any of us would be, agitated or scared. But to bring that person back and say, here's where you were helpful to me, here's where you maybe weren't so helpful, here's where I didn't understand what was happening to me. Those are more organic ways in which we're trying to alter the setting, but I think there's room for, at the policy level, funders requiring that those who are funded pay attention to implicit bias, institutional racism, realizing that some of these are LGBT youth who have been victims of violence. We cannot enter into, I think, this complicity of the stereotype that's propagated widely about these young people. There are many, many different strengths and challenges, and we have this moment of opportunity in partnership with others in the community to allow for these young people to heal and be safe.
To add on that, so in our program, we also get feedback from our participants. We've done focus groups, what has worked for them, what hasn't worked, what they feel they need. Another element of the program is we wanted to start kind of bring that conversation around working with this population to the larger audience. So we hosted a conference in Brooklyn called Paving the Way to Healing and Recovery. And the purpose of that conference was to get service providers that are working with this population, people that are interested in working with this population, and we wanted to get some of the young men's voices out there too, to start that conversation. And you know, you go to most of these conferences and everyone's talking about how wonderful their programs are. Our intention was to say, well, this is what we're doing, and this is where we're falling short. What information can we get from the Brain Trust here, including the young men, to improve our services? And in fact, if we don't actually have the capacity to work with this population, okay, we'll get out the way and let the others take lead. So we've done this 2 years in a row. We've had some great turnout, and we want to continue that conversation.
Great, thank you. This might, sorry, this might be the last question, but we'll see how quickly we get it in. This is from Deborah Howard, who is a transition coordinator at a school in Ohio. And she works with formerly incarcerated students who are returning to public school. And so she asks how you would train educators to do interventions in the classroom. Oftentimes, PTSD as a result from years of exposure to violence plays out in the classroom, and teachers really struggle with how to address it, both academically and behaviorally.
So I do a lot of work in a couple of schools in Brooklyn. And one thing I always recommend to the staff and the social workers is really better collaboration between the social workers and the teachers. Because I get being a teacher is really challenging, and after a while it can become about managing the classroom, but collaborating with the social worker who's doing the social emotional work with that student, better communication, I feel, can really help improve teachers' involvement with the students, and also understanding that the people cope differently, and also be mindful of how maybe a young man flips over, throws a chair. He's not necessarily, that doesn't necessarily mean he's a danger to anybody. He's just upset, and perhaps he's just upset and doesn't know how to really express himself because he's lacking that emotional intelligence that we try to build up on in our program.
Great, thank you. And thank you to everyone who submitted questions, and I wish we had more time for them. But hopefully this is the beginning of a conversation that we can continue. And if you're looking for ways to continue this conversation, I would love to direct you to some resources that are available. There is the Youth Alive website. Among the resources that are available there is information about something we call START, which is a screening and tool for awareness and relief of trauma. This was actually something that we developed through a series of focus groups with young men who had been victims of gunshot violence in partnership with the Center for Nonviolence and Social Justice at Drexel University. And what it is a brief interview where you can talk to someone in about 20, 30 minutes about how trauma's affected their life and offer them resources. So a quick example is, I know, Ted, you mentioned sleep quality being a major issue, right, with the young men you work with. So if sleep quality is a problem, right, which it so often is, if you're not sleeping well, then we offer tools to help support your sleep hygiene. So that's an example of something that this tool does, and it's to sort of counter the idea that a lot of interactions with institutions are unsatisfying because you get diagnosed with what's wrong with you, but not any help for how to take care of yourself because of what happened to you. So that's one of the things that's available on the Youth Alive website. The next resource there is the National Network of Hospital-Based Violence Intervention Programs website. And so among the resources available there are, and I was told, you'd be ready for my prop, is this book. And so this book was actually developed through a grant from the Office for Victims of Crime, and it's a guide for communities that want to start a hospital-based violence intervention program. And so what it does is it talks about the various needs that you might have as you start it up, and gives examples from sites all around the country. So you can see it's not a one-size-fits-all, and you can think about what works best in your community for who you're working with. So you can download this for free, or for a very nominal fee, have it shipped to you in this beautiful bound copy. The Healing Justice Alliance website you can go to for different resources, including recordings of webinars. You can also sign up for a newsletter. In that newsletter are information about the latest research on violence and victimization, information about trauma-informed practices that actually the Center for Nonviolence and Social Justice produces every couple months, information on funding, information about how to communicate in your community about how violence with young men is covered and should be discussed, and other topics that are of interest, right, to folks who are interested in something like this today. The Healing Hurt People website has a lot of resources on it, including some connection to resources on trauma-informed care, as well as information about healing hurt people. And what's exciting is in September, it will look very different because it's being revamped. So it's check it out now and then check it out later, too. And then for more information about the Crown Heights Mediation Center's Make It Happen program, there's a resource here as well. Among the things that you will find on this website that are exciting is a toolkit that they have developed around responding to trauma among young men of color, adapting the Crown Heights approach for your community. So hopefully between some of these resources and then the ones that you generate and call to our attention, we'll be able to really share with each other knowledge and best practices about ways to help male survivors of color. I want to give each of you a chance to say any final thoughts or statements, but for my part, let me just say that I am so grateful for your participation in this. You know, we've talked a lot about healing today. We've talked a lot about justice, and you know, thinking about the staggering statistic that John shared about how 45% of people who are shot or stabbed will happen again, right? That nearly half the people this happens to will happen again. It strikes me that justice for these young men is, at the very least, trying to prevent a re-victimization, and I think with your outstanding work, you've done that. So in our final minute, if you have any closing thoughts that you would like to share before we go.
I would just like to thank you all for bringing this subject into the forefront and being here to discuss it, because I believe if we don't pay attention and make some direct actions to helping those victims that are underserved, which are the male victims of violence, that our communities are going to be much more harder to heal and move forward in our healing process, because you can't leave those traumatized victims out there alone. If we don't support them, then we will soon find out that those unresolved feelings and those unresolved mental issues will be something that we'll all pay for later on. So I thank you guys for starting the discussion in here today.
I would just echo those. I would say that our work is larger than violence alone, that the issue of trauma looms larger in all of our work, and it looms large in every system. So that while we're talking about it in the context of justice and health, we've touched on it in education, we've touched on it in societal and political organization around issues of racial disparities and racism. And so this is a step forward, I think, in all of us collaborating to realize that these systems have to touch each other. No single system can do this work. But if we change our narrative, this is part of changing the narrative about young survivors of violence who are males of color. And I think that's what gives me the most optimism for the future.
I'm just going to echo everything that's been said and add that we are grateful for this opportunity to speak on it and get this message out there. And the goal is really to make sure that all young people, especially young boys and men of color, receive equitable and appropriate trauma-informed care so that they can heal just like anyone.
And obviously, I want to echo everybody else's comments here. I am unbelievably grateful and humbled that I'm able to do this work. But one takeaway I want to give you guys is to understand that people want to be validated in their experiences and accepted, and they also want to feel safe. So working with people and what that safety looks like for them and trying to get them to a place where that safety is actually really is safety. So safety in the community, safety of their emotional experiences. So that's what I would like to just throw out there. People want to stay safe and validated and heard. So thank you.
Thank you all for that. What a powerful discussion we've had. I think I want to thank our presenters for all that they shared today. I think we have, of course, a lot more work to do based on our discussion and some of the questions that came up. But I hope you all have been inspired by what we've heard to continue this work. So the two things that I want you all to continue to do and to help OVC to do is, one, to make sure that we continue to change that narrative, to ensure that these young men are recognized as victims and connected to services. And with that, help us in OVC continue our work to ensure that these young men, as well as all crime victims, are connected to trauma-informed, victim-centered, and culturally appropriate services when they are harmed. Just a short note so everyone online will know that OVC TTAC will have a recording of today's event posted on within a couple of weeks on the webinar page, and you can visit the webinars page to learn more about this upcoming webinars as well as other archived training sessions that are forthcoming. Oh, I want to go back one moment too because I forgot one thing. And that's for anyone who has an interest in hearing more or learning more about working with young men of color who are harmed by violence, please feel free to contact Youth Alive. The contact information for Linnea Ashley, who's our national training and, oh wow, I can't see that far, advocacy manager at Youth Alive is on the screen now. So please feel free to contact them if you have any questions or interests in learning more about working with this population. And with that, thank you, and please help me thank our presenters today.